Hello, welcome to Carol's Books and Storytime. It's that time of year again when we celebrate Mother's Day or Mothering Sunday. And on this day, we honour our mothers and we buy them little gifts and perhaps take them out to tea or to the cinema and just give Mum a little treat to say thank you. Now, just lately, I've been pondering a lot on the role of a mother. What exactly is a mother's role? What exactly is she expected to do? Having been a daughter, a mother to 4 girls, a surrogate mum to several other young ladies living abroad, and this week a young mum friend of mine telling me jokingly that I have an extra daughter and 2 more granddaughters, plus the fact that I have 5 grandchildren, I think I might be a tad qualified to speak on the role of what is a mother. The first observation I'm going to make is that the role has changed over the years since I was a child. And I'm going to divide this chat into 3 sections and try to deal with each one in turn. Number 1, the role of mum in my mum's generation as observed by me as a child. 2, how I perceive my role as a mum to my 4 daughters. 3, my perception of the role now as I observe my daughters, who are mums, and my young mum friends coping with the role in a very different world. Now, number 1, the role of mum in my mother's generation as observed by me. Now, I can only go on how I was brought up myself. And this is how it is. Let me state first and foremost that the women of my mother's generation, for the most part, did not go out to work. They were stay-at-home mums, whose primary concern was to look after the children and the house. And in my mother's case, that involved living out in the sticks in a foreign land. Now, my mum was all mine for 4.5 years of my life. She was my protector, my teacher, my playmate, my nurse when I was ill, my confidant until the day she died, and my very, very best friend. I spoke to her every week without fail when I left home. Long distance telephone calls. During my life, my mum made all my clothes, including my wedding dress, including coats and all the clothes for my siblings, on her faithful black Singer sewing machine. Not electric, you understand, but turned by hand. She made toys and mended them when they came apart at the seams, or white ants packed. She made a sack full of dolls' clothes. She baked, she cooked, she taught in the little school I attended. Mum also found time to help my dad in his work. She was a keen gardener and loved to arrange flowers. As well as all those accomplishments, my mum also was a very good musician and she played the piano beautifully. My siblings and I knew that Mum was always there for us to love and encourage us. She defended us like a tigress and spent many a sleepless night walking the floor with one of us if we were unwell. Mum also did not hesitate when the occasion arose to administer a spanking, but not until we had had a talk about the misdemeanour. Mum and Dad encouraged all of us to get a good education and train for a career. Her favourite words to me were, "You never know when you will be called upon to support yourself and maybe your children. It is best to do it by having training in a job you can go back to." How wise were her words and actions. My mum's role in life was to bring up her children and support my father in his work. This she did, in my opinion, absolutely brilliantly. Now, me as a mum, I don't think I could live up to my mum, my own mum. Let me say first and foremost that I wanted to be a stay-at-home mum. And like my mother had been to me and my siblings, but unfortunately that was not to be the case. From the time my eldest daughter was 3 months old, I had to find some form of employment in order to meet the financial needs of my little family. We took in lodgers. I did home teaching and supply teaching for the school where I had worked before having my baby. I was lucky I was able to take my child in with me to school. By the time baby number 2 came along, my eldest was in nursery part-time and my friend was able to care for her and help out, having had twins herself around about the same time that I'd had my first child. Now, baby number 2, I used to take to work with me. In fact, when the sound of the telephone rang at 7:15 in the morning, and she would climb into her pushchair and say, "And what school are we going to today, Mummy?" Looking back, I've always had to work in order to keep a roof over our heads and food on our table. Like my mother, I made clothes for my children, including coats. I learned to knit and sew and crochet. I baked, I cooked, I bought the book Feed Your Family for £5 a day and found it worked. I included my children in the baking sessions, just like my mother had included me. I talked to them on the long walks to work, and when we went shopping, they helped to find things. I read to them, I played with them. In the school holidays, we went on camping trips. I did what I could, but I could not be to them the mother my mum was to me. I had to work. I just ran out of time. Once my children were in full-time education, I went back to my career full-time, balancing it with my further role as a student and a mum, all the time supporting my children through primary, secondary, and then university. I was a very proud mum indeed when they received their degrees, and I feel that in the education aspect of their lives, I had lived up to my mother's mantra of the girls getting a good education so that they could support themselves. But unlike my mum, I couldn't be a stay-at-home mum. Now, my perception of the role of the mum in the 21st century, very quickly, so quickly, at a flick of an eye, the world changes, especially our Western world. Mums in our Western world today face different challenges to what my mother and I faced. In this day and age, a woman does not tend to give up a good job in order to be a full-time mum. There are various reasons for this, one of which is the fact that housing costs so much and the pound no longer has the buying power it did. The other is the world of technology is moving so fast that it would be difficult for them to keep up if they took a break. Then there is the question that many couples now are having their children before actually tying the knot, because the wedding is so very, very expensive. Then in this day and age, there are various forms of families, not always with a mum and a dad. There are more single parents out there now than ever before. Although many of my young friends are brilliant mums and do what they can in very difficult circumstances, they do find life hard and motherhood not as wonderful as they thought it would be. Many are on their own, struggling to hold down a job and provide the best they can for their children. Many are too tired to deal with the baby tantrums and the teenage sulks and give in by handing the screaming toddler or teenager the phone to play with. I noticed from my seat in the supermarket coffee shop that many mums are rushing around like headless chickens, filling their trolleys with convenience food whilst baby is having a grizzle or an out-and-out temper tantrum. I see very few mums actually talking to their babies and engaging them in the activity of shopping. So where does that leave us with this question, what is a mother's role? Looking back, I have come to the conclusion that the role of mum has changed so much. No longer can mum stay at home. She has to help bring in an income in order to keep a roof over the head of her offspring. And no longer, it seems, can the man be the only breadwinner. Women cannot afford to stay at home and be mum. Mums are so tired that in spite of all the gadgets, they just do not have time to do the same things that my mum did when I was little, like cooking and sewing and knitting and all the other things. They don't have the time to be a full-time mum and enjoy and educate their children. They don't have time to sew and knit and play snakes and ladders and Snap or Cluedo. They don't have time to do flashcards, the times tables, or help their children sort out the Smarties, to discover a third, a half, a quarter, a fifth, and so on. It's all on an app, one young mum told me. I just give them the phone and let them get on with it. I could be judgmental, but that would do no good, because these mums are struggling to cope with their own lives and be a mum. So what is the answer? To my way of thinking, nursery schools are not the answer. Although they're very good, some children as young as 3 months do not get to see their mums. They are dropped off at 7 in the morning and not picked up until 6, and then often by a childminder or an au pair. I'm not decrying nursery school or childminders or au pairs. I've used them myself, and most have done a brilliant job. So what are we to do about this problem of allowing mums to be mums? Or has the genie been well and truly let out of the bottle? It'd be wonderful if mums, or dads for that matter, could have a full-time job of being at home with the children and teaching them and nurturing them. I think the answer is to find a balance. After all, what is the point of having children if you're not going to engage with them and enjoy their company? They are so precious and so vulnerable. There's an ancient saying that it takes a village to bring up a child. I do think that that is true, but in this modern age, families are scattered to the four corners of this kingdom and beyond. So, what is my conclusion? Well, I think society has changed so much over the years that it is no longer recognisable. I feel that first and foremost, King Greed rules and makes things harder for the general population. The family, in the truest sense of the word, needs to be a place where children are safe, loved, and nurtured. And perhaps it's time that we got back to the old values of my mother's generation. Perhaps it's time to get back to the village. Perhaps it's time to recreate a functional family and extended family that do not live hundreds of miles apart, so that all can help to bring up the next generation and pass on the wisdom of the old. I don't know what the answer is, but these are just a few of my suggestions. If you've got any comments onto how we can improve things, then I would welcome some comments. It would be really good. Okay, take care. Bye. Happy Mother's Day.